Welcome to Leading People with me, Jerry Murray. This episode of Leading People is brought to you by Wide Circle, helping you make better talent decisions. To learn more, visit widecircle.eu. That's WIDECIRCLE.eu. Leading People is a podcast which features insightful conversations with leading people about leading people. Yes, that's a play on words. In each episode, you get tips from leading people such as CEOs, HR professionals, authors, and thought leaders on all aspects of leading people, including how to attract, engage, develop, and grow talent to build successful organizations. And we provide insights on how to lead yourself so you can consistently perform at your best. A while back, I came across an intriguing article on the BBC Work Life website. It was written by this week's guest, David Robson. I later went on to purchase his excellent and extremely well-researched book entitled The Intelligence Trap. In this conversation, we chat about the intelligence trap and David's forthcoming book, The Expectation Effect. And David reveals some fascinating insights into how so many smart people make dumb decisions and how to revolutionize your thinking so you can make wiser decisions. So, let's dive in. David Robson, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, David, we had a little bit of a chat before we came on air, and I discovered you via an article on the BBC, and I'll come to that later on. And then I found this wonderful book you'd written called The Intelligence Trap. But I think for our listeners out there who may not know you yet, I hope they will get to know you after this and go out and start exploring your wonderful work. Maybe just how did you get here to where you are today? Was there a person, place, or some sort of event or something that stands out in your journey, or a little epiphany moment? Or was it just a series of little things that came together? You're in scientific journalism, but I believe you started off in the world of maths and that. So maybe just unpack a little bit, introduce yourself to the listeners.
Sure. Yeah. So I studied mathematics at Cambridge University. And as much as I loved that degree, I kind of missed writing and kind of the creative side of my studies before university. So I'd always enjoyed English and foreign languages. And so science journalism just seemed the best way for me to combine both. So I was a features editor at New Scientist for 5 years, and then a senior journalist at the BBC for 5 years. And I was always specialising in neuroscience and psychology. And that was really just simply because those subjects fascinated me the most. And in both of my jobs, I was given a lot of freedom to just pursue my curiosity. And I can talk a little bit about the kind of importance of curiosity and how psychologists are realising that that's actually the kind of the biggest driver of our intellectual performance. So I was very fortunate there to have bosses that allowed me to do that. And then I kind of, during this career, I obviously came across the work of lots of incredibly intelligent people, Nobel Prize winners, and, people who were really the top of their field. And you often found, when you dug around their lives, that they, even though they were performing so well in their particular profession, that in their personal lives or with their personal beliefs, they were often less than rational. So one of the examples was Kary Mullis, who came up with the polymerase chain reaction, the PCR, which, of course, we know a lot about now because it's used in the COVID tests. But, it's used throughout biology now. It was really kind of era-defining, his discovery. But this guy, when you read his autobiography, he believes in astrology. He was a climate change denier. He denied the link between HIV and AIDS, had some really quite reprehensible views, in my opinion. And so it was that kind of story that just got me wondering, how could someone be so smart but so stupid, in my opinion? it's like his intelligence was kind of isolated in a silo almost. And that was what inspired my first book, The Intelligence Trap, where I really delved into the psychology of that.
Right. So you mentioned curiosity, and therefore I'm pretty sure that our listeners are becoming really curious now about what you're going to talk about next. And that's what grabbed me a little bit in this intelligence trap was, particularly anybody out there is now looking up their IQ as we talk. It's not that smart people aren't able to operate efficiently now, but it was all about stuff. I think if you're in the book here, it says how to apply our intelligence more wisely, identify bias and enhance our rationality quotient, read and regulate our emotions, fine-tune our intuition, navigate ambiguity and uncertainty, and think more flexibly about seemingly intractable problems. I'm sure this is stuff that most people would like to do. But maybe talk a bit about this rationality quotient idea. What is that? Because we all talk about emotional intelligence and our IQ and all this. But what is the rationality quotient that you've discovered?
Yeah, so that was really one of the pieces of research that kind of really led me down this rabbit hole. And that's work by Keith Stanovich in Canada. And he has spent decades looking at cognitive bias, the kinds of things that Daniel Kahneman had studied. So, the sunk cost bias, where you kind of pour more and more resources into a failing project because you don't want to lose your initial investment, but actually you're just losing more and more money. You're never going to get it back. And what Keith Stanovich had found was that actually, like, people's susceptibility to that kind of bias just doesn't correlate very well with their intelligence at all. Intelligence measured by SATs or by traditional IQ tests, it's just, there's not a strong relationship between both. And he says they're kind of orthogonal, like perpendicular. If you imagine a graph, it would be like a scatter plot where there's no clear correlation. Mm-hmm. And so he put together this rationality quotient that tries to capture that part of thinking that was kind of ignored with the IQ test. I think in the past we'd assumed that if you have an IQ, if you have greater intelligence, you just have greater processing power, and that automatically makes you more rational. But what Keith Stanovich's research showed is that that's not the case.
And for many years, it was thought that if you high IQ and that was it, you were just smart and everything you did would be smart. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's right. Which I guess does kind of make intuitive sense. They saw that IQ is like this kind of underlying brain power, and you can kind of think of it as being like the kind of horsepower of an engine. Mm-hmm. And we know that, a car with a better engine can drive faster. Mm-hmm. But what I think this new research shows is that in the same way that a car needs kind of good brakes and navigation systems and checks and balances, so does your brain needs that to help direct the intelligence in the right way. Otherwise, just like a fast engine could actually lead you into a terrible accident, so can high intelligence if you don't have those checks and balances in place.
And Binay's intention with the IQ test, for those who was never really to start a process of identifying elites, was it? It was more to identify, was it to help people who are less able to learn to improve their learning? Was that correct? Something like that?
Yeah, that's right. So it was kind of at the beginning of France's kind of public education system, and he really wanted to identify the children who were being left behind and to look for ways to kind of remedy that. But it was soon co-opted by this man called Lewis Terman in the US, who was really looking for like the secrets of genius. And he very much believed, at least initially, that you could identify the geniuses amongst very small children, depending on how well they performed on the IQ test, and then that would like predict amazing careers and intellectual performance throughout their lives. Mm-hmm. And he did find the children with high IQs over 140 did tend to have like more kind of white collar careers, and often did become like authors or scientists. But actually, a lot of them also led quite disappointing lives, well, at least disappointing in the terms that Terman had originally imagined. And so even at that early on, you could see that while intelligence is one important aspect of our intellect, it's not the only thing that matters when it comes to making good decisions and living a good life.
Right. And I let the listeners, go out and read your book to find out more about Thurman and all these people he studied. And he himself, I think, was also a victim of his own intelligence trap, wasn't he? And let's not reveal all, but I think if you go to the book, you'll find some fascinating stuff about this guy Thurman and his almost zealous desire to popularize this IQ test. And then we have folks like Howard Gardner and that who probably were early pioneers in recognizing that there was a lot more to how people were able to be successful in life than just their pure IQ. Although I think in the book you write that his work is also a little bit on the edge of some people question it, and you've identified some other researchers who've maybe fine-tuned things a bit more. Maybe explain that to our listeners a little bit.
Totally. So, I mean, I think Howard Gardner's idea of multiple intelligences is a beautiful idea. So, I mean, the number of intelligences he lists kind of depends on which book you read of his, because it keeps on growing. But essentially, he points out, I think rightly, that people are going to have specialisms. They're going to have natural affinities for things. And it's not a case that someone with a high IQ is just good at everything. Like, they're more likely to be good at a broader range of things than someone with a low IQ, because it is general intelligence. So, if you have a high IQ, you probably do find learning any skill a little bit easier than someone with low intelligence. But, Howard Gardner pointed out that actually someone we'll just have like an affinity for music, or maybe an affinity for mechanics, or, artistic creativity. But I think like the problem for lots of scientists is that his theory wasn't very testable. And so there's another researcher that I really respect called Robert Sternberg, who just kind of focused on 3 different types of intelligence that I think cover most important areas of life. So that's analytical intelligence, which is, what's measured by IQ tests. So that's more like abstract thinking, seeing rules and patterns. Then there's creative intelligence, which isn't necessarily about kind of artistic endeavors, but that's about things like counterfactual thinking. So whether you can imagine different possible scenarios, or, even look back in the past and imagine how events might have turned out if the situation had evolved slightly differently. And that's really important, for if you're planning a project. That's super important to be able to look at different possibilities before you make the ultimate decision, and to try to kind of preempt any problems. And then finally, there's practical intelligence, and that can often be like misunderstood as like whether you're, the kind of person who can work out how to program kind of your TV so that it will record the right types of programs or whatever. But actually, this is much more about being pragmatic in life. So, if you're, it's about kind of, if you're an employee at work, can you kind of up-manage your boss so that they will give you the opportunities that you need? Can you manage a team? Can you manage to prioritize your time? Which I don't know if you found, Jerry, but I found in lots of my careers, actually, lots of really intelligent people find it really difficult to prioritize their tasks so that they can kind of fit everything in without creating kind of big traffic jams for their colleagues. So it's all of that kind of thing. And what Robert Sternberg found was that he could actually test these skills with different kinds of exams, and that they were really good at predicting people's performance at work or at university over and above traditional IQ tests. So he rolled them out at universities, in fact, and found that in those admissions in which he used these tests, those students actually just performed better overall than those who had just scored on their IQ.
And actually, you've done a fantastic section in the book on this. I read it with great interest. Although he does sometimes, I think, struggle to get his work more mainstream, isn't that right? That was one of your observations, was that it's a shame his work doesn't go more mainstream in education and other areas, isn't that right?
Yeah, that's right. And there's just a lot of inertia in education, I think. Like, I don't know why, because actually education, I think, is full of these kind of fads, where new kind of buzzwords come along and teachers are told to apply it. But in this case especially, people are just reluctant to kind of try a new way of admitting students, even though I think Robert Sternberg's experimental work, in the real world has shown that it is effective. And it could just be a case of it being more complicated to administer kind of multiple exams. I don't know. But yeah, there's definitely, despite proven successes, it's still not being accepted across the field in education.
And it's still worth reading about the way you've pulled it together. So I'll leave that one for our listeners to explore themselves. And you talk about, this thing about prioritizing. I mean, over the years, the last 6-7 years, I've been teaching, the concept of time management, which it doesn't really exist. I mean, it's usually attention management and energy management that what is getting to people. And I find myself in the room with people with incredibly high IQs from very, very prestigious organizations. And what we try to do is to teach them not to over-intellectualize the whole process of their time. Just look at what they're doing with their time and start to realize how it affects how they actually put where they put their attention, how it consumes their energy. Like focused work will always start to deplete energy, and to be able to sort of recognize in themselves how they operate more effectively and efficiently. So sometimes it's as simple as that, rather than making it into an intellectual exercise for them. So been quite interesting to do that over the years. They're all very smart people. They've never really come across people who aren't, but they struggle with it, yeah?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And it's kind of this idea of metacognition in a way. So being aware of your own thoughts and processes. And lots of people, seem to have a blind spot for that, I think, probably in their personal lives, but definitely in their professional lives. And it's just a case of asking yourself like tough questions about how you could be more effective at what you do. And what I've noticed is just people tend to get stuck in a kind of rut. Like they see that there's like one, maybe they started out doing a process in one way and they're really reluctant to change.
And a lot of it then comes down to understanding how our brains work anyway. And now I'm going to dovetail this across now. I'm going to dovetail this across now to the article that I read that you wrote. You co-wrote it, actually. And I'm going to link it to Sternberg's Creativity Intelligence. And then we're going to get into the new book. You wrote this article called Why the Paradox Mindset is the Key to Success. So for our listeners, I work a lot with this concept of paradoxes. So it was the thing that grabbed my attention. So for our listeners, why is a paradox mindset key to success before we start to get into what you call the expectation effect? But let's start with the paradox mindset and how it relates to creativity, etc.
The paradox mindset is fascinating to me. And it's where you take things, two concepts that you would think should be kind of at odds with one another. And so, I think the obvious example in business is that people assume that kind of you either cut costs and reduce the quality of your product, or you increase your costs and increase the quality. But you can't have low costs and high quality. That's and, so lots of businesses kind of operate on this kind of model. But what Louisos, who co-wrote the article with me, what he had shown in his research is that actually when companies try to do both, so when they have the kind of the goal of producing something really high quality, like much high quality than they have already done, while also cutting costs, that kind of tension can fuel creativity, and it makes individuals and companies as a whole more creative. It sparks new ideas. It kind of pushes people really to test the limits of what they're doing. And it can be really effective for the individual and for organizations.
Yeah, because there was a lot of work, a lot of research and work done in the maybe 20, 30 years ago on, you could only be either operationally excellent or you could be product innovation focused or customer centric. These kind of terms that Riersema and Tracy wrote about and created this model and that. And yet you cite in the article Apple, where you cite that not only are they incredibly innovative with their products and command a huge premium for what they produce, they're also incredibly efficient underneath the surface. Yeah?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think in a way it's because, you can try to be really creative along kind of one variable. So say, the increasing the quality of, your iPhone or whatever, and adding lots of new features. But I think actually then adding the additional constraint of then cutting costs and increasing efficiency, that actually then forces you down other avenues you wouldn't have considered before. And you might find that actually something that cuts costs simultaneously can, improve the product, the user's experience of the product in some way that you just didn't expect. So it's kind of forcing you to reconsider lots of the basic concepts of what you're doing, and that's what fuels the creativity.
And of course, in our daily lives outside of business, we also live in paradoxical situations like you've got to be cruel to be kind. It's a sort of tough love, right. Or less is more. We use paradoxical statements quite a lot, and people who work in those areas, if you talk to a graphic designer, they will tell you that white space isn't nothing. So they'll often say less is more. I mean, take stuff away, you'll improve the quality of your design. Yeah. And it's this ability to hold two what seemingly competing concepts or ideas and recognize that they're synergistic or complementary rather than contradictory. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's it. And so I'd say in a different profession entirely, something like teaching, you might decide that you want to be, that your focus for a term is to be like, stricter with your children and to get better behaviour from them, while also being kinder to them at the same time. And, I think lots of teachers might think that there's a kind of trade-off a bit between whether between your kind of friendliness to students and the discipline that you dish out. But actually, like when teachers are forced to consider that they could be they could actually change their attitude to the students to be much warmer, much kinder, while also making sure that the discipline is even better than it had been before. That's the kind of thing that then might inspire lots of new kind of educational methods that will help them to achieve both goals.
Because they reframe discipline as constructive and actually kind to children in the long term by teaching them about boundaries and teaching them how to manage expectations, for example, right?
In the next part of our conversation, David explains how he came to write his new book, The Expectation Effect. And he shares some of the intriguing insights he gleaned from his research into sleep, exercise, food, and much more. But first, a word from one of our sponsors. We live in a world of increasing complexity and seemingly endless paradoxes. If you're a coach or trainer, and particularly if you work with teams, and you'd like to help your clients develop both their own and their team's adaptive capacity to deal with these challenges, then you might want to check out the Paradox Coaching Academy at paradoxcoaching.co. That's paradoxcoaching.co. Or to arrange an exploratory conversation, simply send an email to paradoxcoachingacademy, all one word, at gmail.com. Now, back to our conversation.
Let's now get into the new book, which we're recording this still in the end of 2021. So the new book is coming out in the spring of 2022, because I know it's coming out at different release dates in different parts of the world, right?
Yeah.
And you can pre-order it, right? Let's get that in there, because I've pre-ordered my copy. So you can go to Amazon, places like that, and you can place your order. And lo and behold, one day in the early part of next year, it will arrive and you'll say, oh, wow, I hadn't expected that. Oh, had I expected it, right? So it's called the actually, you tell the readers, it's called the
Expectation Effect, and it's about how your mindset can transform your life in numerous ways. So really across the board, from your kind of responses to medical treatments, to the effects of exercise, the effects of your diet, to the effects of your sleep and insomnia, how you deal with stress, how you cope under pressure. All of these things really depend on our expectations and beliefs. And the idea here is that we all have different mindsets, different assumptions we make about the world. So you might think you're just the kind of person who finds it really difficult, harder than the average person to lose weight. Now, actually, you might think that that's kind of based on experience and like that it's just true. You just assume that it's true. But actually, the science shows that a lot of these assumptions don't have like much objectivity to them. And that when you change these assumptions, these beliefs in people, that actually that can have profound effects, not just on their behavior, but on their actual biology, their physiology. So this book's all about the mind-body connection and how that combined with behavioral change can bring about really positive changes to your life.
Right. That's now, if our listeners haven't found at least one thing in that list to make them want to learn more and read more, then I'd be very surprised if somebody hadn't got at least one thing on that list. Without revealing everything that's in the book, maybe just I took note of a few of the things that you highlight, which I guess are teasers, but maybe just throw a few of those out there that people might go, really?
So I think the one that I found, like talking to friends and family and, my agent and my editor, they all said like had quite a big impact on their life was our kind of assumptions about sleep. So I think it's really common for a large number of people, maybe 40% of the population, to assume that any sleep loss is going to have a really bad effect on their the way they feel the next day. And, it's really unhealthy. They worry that, if they lose like 20 minutes or an hour of sleep in the night, that they're going to be really tired the next day. They're not going to be able to concentrate. They're going to be in a bad mood, all of these things. Now, what the research shows is that all of that is down to expectation. And the researchers kind of separate people into complaining good sleepers and non-complaining bad sleepers. So you might have someone who's really suffers from bad insomnia, but they just kind of take a positive mindset to that. They tell themselves, they don't focus on the sleep they lost, but they focus on the sleep that they did manage to get. And these people are like surprisingly, free of any of the usual effects of insomnia. Whereas the complaining good sleepers, these are people who have suffered minimal sleep loss, but they really believe that they, are suffering because of their insomnia. And they show all of the effects of insomnia that you would expect. And so it's really just the product of belief in that case. Now, obviously, the best situation is to be someone who gets the perfect amount of sleep and has a really positive attitude. Like, there's no question about that. And there's no question that, really chronic insomnia over long periods of time is bad for your health. But in general, this shows that actually if you wake up in the morning and you're worried about having less sleep than normal, that actually it's your mindset that's going to affect how you feel over the course of the day. And by shifting that mindset, by focusing on the sleep that you did have, and by recognizing that actually you can probably function just as well as if you'd had a full night's sleep, that can be really beneficial to people. And so I've had like friends who are parents, with lots of interrupted nights with their kids, telling me that they've that this completely changed their life in a way, because it just helped them to kind of get over that kind of fatigue that they had been feeling over those first few months of having their newborn child.
It reminds me of a phrase from many years ago, from my own formations and trainings years ago, about you get what you focus on.
Yeah, that's very much it. I mean, it's very much about kind of what you pay attention to with your mindsets. And another example is kind of with exercise. And, this changed my life, actually. So if you're at the gym and you're exercising, you're putting in a lot of effort, but you always feel like you're not doing enough. You might look at the kind of guy next to you and see like he's like got bigger muscles or a better six pack or is running faster on the treadmill. If you're doing that upward comparison, you get less benefits from your exercise than if you have a positive mindset about the exercise you're doing. And if you actually see that any exercise that you're performing is good for your body and you kind of celebrate that. And I'm not just talking about mood, although that is really important. It's one of the primary reasons that people should do exercise. And we do know that mindsets affect kind of how positive people feel after exercise, and the benefits for mental health. There is a kind of placebo effect there, but also the physiological benefits of exercise. So, whether it reduces your blood pressure, even how much weight you lose after exercising, seems to depend to a certain extent on your mindset and whether you're kind of being positive about the changes you're making, or whether you're always feeling that you're not kind of matching up to what you kind of arbitrarily believe you should be doing.
Yeah. I guess, because I haven't seen the book yet, I'm going to guess that you might cover some stuff about the longer term benefits of positivity versus negativity on your health. I mean, all the negative people out there going, "Oh yeah, I thought he'd get to that eventually," and yeah, they're going to beat me up. But there is quite a body of research out there that says that positivity is beneficial for one's health, and therefore, I guess the implication is that if your mindset tends towards seeing things or processing things more negatively, that there might be some advantage in looking at alternative ways of processing the world. Could that be true? Or
that's definitely it. I mean, you do find like surveys showing that if people who report kind of greater, more positive emotions in their life do tend to suffer, do tend to have better health than people who are more pessimistic. And I think the challenge for that is that it's quite vague, that kind of advice. And that's where lots of positive thinking books, I think, had kind of fallen down before, because it's like, I've suffered from depression. And like when you've got depression, it's really difficult to just be told, be happy.
Yeah.
And I think even if you don't have depression, like you can't just manufacture kind of good feelings. So I think with the expectation effect, what's different here is that it's looking at specific expectations in specific areas of life. And, even someone who's generally quite positive, like might feel quite negative about different elements of their life. So they might be quite positive about their fitness, but they might also think that they just have kind of limited willpower. So, they just think they're the kind of person who can't resist temptation. There's lots of variability there. And what the expectation effect shows is that you can pick apart all of these expectations and you can change them kind of one by one. So, you might not need to change your mindset about exercise, but if you suffer from the kind of concept that you have really limited willpower, well, you can change that expectation too. And it's very much about reframing. It's not just seeing the world as this kind of sunny, beautiful place, but it's almost trying to look at things objectively. And so often, actually, our expectations are needlessly negative. And so it's reframing it to actually say, well, like if you look at this rationally, you're actually doing great, or that actually you can be factually accurate in appraising the situation in a way that's a bit more optimistic.
So I guess there's an element of self-awareness building throughout something like this, because unfortunately a lot of people don't. I mean, it's not that they couldn't do it, it's just that often life goes so fast for them, they don't actually spend a lot of time actually thinking about themselves and how they're actually interacting with the world around them and developing their self-awareness in terms of both physiology, in terms of thought patterns, etc. Is there an element of that to writing this book, to make people a bit more aware of how they might be reacting to the world and processing it so that they can choose whether they want to make changes? Or
yeah, that's exactly it. And I think that's actually what connects it to the intelligence trap, and that they're both kind of based on this principle of kind of greater self-awareness, and kind of looking at situations kind of rationally, like not just coming to assumptions that are false. And you're absolutely right that the expectation effect is all about choice and about analysis. It's not just kind of, you're not fooling yourself here. There's no deception here. It's all about just appraising the situation and seeing if you could maybe reframe it in a way that's more positive, but only based on the scientific evidence. That's what's its strength, I think, is that, when you read the studies, you can see that there's a strong scientific basis for these effects. And once you understand the mechanisms, that actually makes it a lot easier for you to reappraise the situation at hand, because you're not just relying on some magical thinking like, was popular with like The Secret. You're actually looking at, these carefully controlled trials that have shown that when people change their mindsets in these particular areas, that they can bring about these profound changes to their body or their behavior or their kind of general mental health.
Yeah, and you mentioned The Secret. We won't go into the detail of that. I mean, there are some positive aspects to The Secret, but sometimes it's oversimplifying this concept of success, and sometimes people buy into that, and of course they get very disappointed. Strangely, it's always the people who are interviewed for these books are always have made huge money and everything else, so actually it's very easy for them to sit back and say, well, it's just like this. You sit down and you envision your success coming to you, and sometimes I think that can slightly mislead people, and if they don't take a more rational, I mean, yes, there's a lot of interesting things in those models. At the same time, we have to take a bit more of a rational, objective view on what's really possible for us and where we are in our lives, the context and everything else, which sometimes can be overlooked.
That's exactly it. And I mean, I think The Secret does rely on this kind of like paranormal kind of. I mean, it's framed scientifically, but it's still like it's not the kind of science that most scientists would accept. Whereas the expectation effect is kind of pretty robust, and we know the specific mechanisms now. So if I give one example of, say, how your mindset affects your diet. Now, I think if you were following kind of positive thinking manifestos in the past, you would just be, and in fact I think The Secret kind of says this, you visualize yourself as being a thin person and then you become thin. That's not what the expectation effect would argue. It's more that specifically, like with the food you're eating, the food that's in front of you, your expectations of that food and how many calories are in that food are going to affect your digestion, because your brain is kind of preparing the body for what it's about to eat, and if it thinks there's not many calories in a piece of food, it's actually not really preparing its digestion for that. So what happens is the food kind of passes through you a lot more quickly, and you then feel a lot hungrier afterwards. So in that case, it's partly why diets, I think, are so difficult, because if you're eating these foods that are kind of healthy, health foods, and you're focusing on how few calories they have, like you're setting your body up to find it less satisfying and fulfilling. So in this case, what you need to do is to think very carefully about, like, actually what that food is providing you. And that includes like the pleasure that you might have from eating it. You're really thinking that actually it's providing all these nutrients for you. You're changing your mindset in that way. And what you find then is that your hormonal response to the food and your kind of digestive system's response changes. So it's actually more satisfying. There have been great studies showing this in a range of different foods, but I think that's the difference to me, is that it's actually looking at the scientific research to see specific ways that you change your mindset. It's not all about just kind of imagining what you want and assuming that it's going to come to you.
Yeah. This must be what the book preview says. Cultivating an indulgent attitude to food helps you lose weight. So I guess people will get to explore that in more detail in the book. Yeah. Something that cropped into my head there as you were talking earlier about expectations. Where does superstition come into all of this?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, I think in the pre-scientific age, like superstitions, were the kind of only way of understanding the world. But what you find is that they actually do benefit us in different ways, because they can kind of change your mindset in much the same way that now understanding the scientific research can do. So one thing that's quite common, is for athletes to use kind of different rituals before their performance to kind of bring them luck and to help improve their focus and concentration. And, studies have shown that actually they are effective. Like an athlete will perform better if they have their lucky charm or perform their ritual than if they don't have that. So it has had like a meaningful change to their performance. But that's not caused by like magic. But what it is that having that ritual has actually changed their brain's perception of the kind of resources that are available to them. And so that can have lots of different effects. Like primarily, I think it changes their kind of ability to concentrate and focus. It's removed the anxiety, but it's also created this idea that actually their kind of willpower is much stronger because of the presence of that ritual or routine. So yeah, I actually think like we shouldn't sneer at superstitious rituals. The great thing is that actually You don't have to be superstitious to benefit from rituals. What scientists have found is that actually picking any kind of routine that feels special and meaningful to you can have the same effect for similar reasons. We see, in a way, it's very similar to research in the placebo effect, which has shown that people actually receive a lot of benefits from taking placebos that are labelled as placebos. So even though people know they're taking a placebo, they can still experience pain relief or reduced inflammation or, relief from their hay fever symptoms. And that's because, you realise there's something special here. And especially once you understand the mind-body connection, you don't need the deception, like just that understanding and then that kind of little kind of trigger with the pill or the superstition can actually have really profound effects for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess having a ritual is a way of reducing uncertainty for people. The brain doesn't like uncertainty anyway, so it's a kind of, if I follow these steps, I tend to produce a performance I'm happy with, so why not follow these steps as part of my build up to whatever it is I'm going to do?
Yeah, exactly. And, there's lots of examples like Mozart, or maybe it was Beethoven, used to count out his coffee beans each morning and would have a really precise number like 36. And for him, that was just really important to have that kind of routine in place to help fuel his creativity. And that's something that I thought about a lot since writing the book, is that, like, I'm not, if I take special care over creating like an espresso in the morning, that's not because I think there's something magic about that, but it's because it's become something that I associate with success. And then because of that association, I kind of feel empowered. I feel more that I've got more self-efficacy. I feel better equipped to deal with the day. And that shouldn't be dismissed. That's actually really important.
So I guess folks out there, pay attention to your rituals and how they affect your expectations for the day, even if it's just making coffee. And I just one kind of final thing on this around the expectation effect. I mean, it's kind of well documented that our brains are not great at predicting things. We tend to often miss the mark. So we think things are going to be incredibly brilliant and they turn out to be kind of lackluster, and the opposite effect. Often we think things will be terrible and they turn out not to be so bad. Everybody's had that experience of saying, well, it wasn't as bad as I thought. So how does that play into the expectation effect?
I mean, that's true. I think in like when you look at these kind of cognitive biases to do with like financial decision making, that kind of thing, where like we've had a lot of focus on the kind of optimism bias. Now, what I would say researching the expectation effect is that actually maybe we've over-egged this idea that we're always overconfident, and that actually, like in many other cases, people are much more negative about what they think is going to happen. And I think there's like an evolutionary reason for that in some ways, especially when it comes to kind of physical challenges, is that, the body kind of needs to, in the past, needed to assume the worst because it needed to be ready for kind of the fight or flight response. It pays to be cautious. What I think now is that actually we can afford to kind of relax that a little bit. And, all of these, by reframing the situation in a way that's not kind of ignoring the kind of anxieties around us, and it's not ignoring the possibility of failure, but it's also just kind of maybe focusing also on the kind of positive elements of challenge. That's also like vitally important. So I think with athletes, for example, the brain is kind of calculating how much energy we can afford to expend, and it's naturally conservative because the worst thing in the past would be for us to like be completely depleted and then to be unable to get food. But that's not a problem for most people in Western societies now. So actually we can benefit a lot from reframing our kind of mindsets about exercise to kind of tell ourselves that actually our bodies are capable of burning more, that we can recruit more muscles, or, all of these things can actually boost your kind of athletic performance, or just how easy you find like a workout in the gym. And that's not going to bring you any harm. It's actually just going to make the whole experience a lot more pleasant.
final few minutes, David provides us with his top tips for how to avoid the intelligence trap and improve your mindset so you can get the most out of the expectation effect.
So if you were going to give our listeners a couple of tips, some things that they could do after they start to explore, so that for anybody wanting to both avoid the intelligence trap and improve their mindset, what would be those couple of things?
Okay, yeah. Well, I'll give you a tip that I think actually can be useful for both. And that is this process called self-distancing. And so that, it might sound a bit kind of woo-woo, but what it just means actually is to just kind of to try to kind of see your situation from someone else's point of view. So you could almost imagine that you're advising a friend who's in the same situation. Now, in terms of the intelligence trap, what that does is it helps you to kind of avoid some of those cognitive biases that might cause you to kind of your intelligence to backfire, essentially. So, it kind of mutes the emotional pull of one particular point of view, kind of your preferred option, and actually just helps you to see the situation a bit more objectively. So if you were thinking about changing job, or even, if you're thinking about kind of asking someone out on a date, your emotions there might be deceptive. And what self-distancing does is just kind of allows you to take a step back so you can just kind of maybe see something that you hadn't seen before, in much the same way that we often find it easier to advise a friend than we would to kind of follow our own advice. That's well known, and this is just kind of applying that. So that can help with the expectation effect to kind of improve decision making. With the intelligence trap to improve decision making. But it can also actually be quite powerful when we're trying to change our expectations of situations. And I'll give an example. So, one of the findings from my book is that people's expectations of aging can have a really profound effect on kind of how quickly they age, like a biological effect, because it's all to do with things like these stress responses. But essentially, if you assume that you're getting frailer as you get older and that you're kind of prone to disability, well, that's going to change your behavior. So you're going to be less likely to do exercise, but it's also going to make kind of everyday situations feel a lot scarier. So that increases your stress response and increases the inflammation that you experience. And then that has a direct kind of physiological effect on your health too. It makes you more prone to illness. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, I think hopefully reading the chapter in my book on aging, people will start to realize that, a lot of the changes that happen as we get older kind of are within our control for a certain degree. So that might help to change your mindset. But I think these opinions are still quite kind of deeply ingrained and difficult to change, especially when we're thinking about ourselves. And so I would say self-distancing there could also be really beneficial. So if you, I might kind of be worrying about aging myself, and could be quite harsh, and quite negative, say if I notice my hair going grey or getting wrinkles or, all of these things. But if I imagine how I would talk to a friend who was having those same anxieties, I would be much kinder and show much more kind of compassion and positivity, and I'll be more likely to focus on all the benefits that come from aging as well, the kind of all of that life experience that you've kind of gained, and all the possibilities that are still open to you. And so that's how I think self-distancing can be helpful to change expectations as well as to improve decision making. And again, I just think in a way it is just giving you a bit more objectivity. It's stopping you being bogged down in these opinions that you've carried with you, and it just helps you maybe to focus on different elements that could be beneficial.
They often say if we spoke out loud some of the things we say to ourselves, we'd be arrested for the criticisms and things we say to ourselves. We'd never voice them to other people. So as you say, this idea of being able to be the advisor to yourself. Some people call it the fly on the wall effect, or they view from the balcony. It's like watching the dance rather than being in the dance, or just it's a skill set actually that I've tested this out with people who are going into kind of conflictual situations, and we get them to role play how they would run the situation, but also role play the other person's response, and then get them to step back. We kind of set 2 chairs up in the room and then get them to stand back and say, well, what do you notice? And you can see these light bulb moments. So it really is, I mean, I've tested this in many, many coaching situations, that it's a profoundly impactful light bulb moment for a person to go, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
Or that person that's me is being unnecessarily harsh, or I'm jumping to conclusions, or I have no basis for what I'm going to say, yet I'm going to say it. So it is a powerful, powerful technique, this, for anybody out there wondering.
Yeah.
It's just to be able to step back.
No, I mean, it's incredibly powerful. And actually, I've just thought of a different example based on what you said. And it's like, we spoke earlier about how, often we can appraise our performance at the gym really negatively because we're you can tell yourself, oh, you're really unfit, you're never going to be as good as that guy, like you're a slob, all of these things. But like, imagine saying that to your friend who is trying to get fit. Like, I mean, I hope like most people would not consider doing that. You'd be encouraging, you'd be kind of celebrating the gains that they're making. And so just kind of taking that outside perspective and just imagining how you might talk to someone who's going through the same situation, I think can effortlessly change your mindset. And what's showing the expectation effect is that will then have immediate benefits and long-term benefits for your physiology, for your fitness, for your mental health.
Right. I think that's a great piece of advice. And I think that's actually in itself quite an interesting task for somebody for the next few days, to start paying it, just stepping back from situations and just checking in with, watching yourself interact with the world and think, etc., can bring some benefits. So that distancing can work. Now, I'm going to put some links in the show notes. And for anybody who wants to get in touch with you, David, what's the best way to get in touch?
So I'm on Twitter, D_A_Robson. There's also my website, which has a contact page, and that's David Robson.
Right. And do you do LinkedIn at all?
Yes, I'm also on LinkedIn.
Okay, and the book will be out in in Europe and the UK, I think, in January, is it?
Yeah, that's right. So it's UK and Commonwealth on January the 6th, and then in the US and Canada on February the 15th.
Well, I sure have enjoyed this conversation. It's been fascinating to hear you talk about and explain your research and some of the things you've discovered. I hope our listeners got also some great insights, and also sharing your wisdom. I guess you gather wisdom as you go through this process. So I'd like to thank you very much for being my guest on this show today.
It's been a complete pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. You will find details of what we covered in the show with links, etc. in the show notes. Please share your key takeaways from today's guest and let your friends and colleagues know about the podcast. Oh, and if there's a particular author or leading thinker you'd like me to interview, just get in touch and I'll do my best to get them on the show. This episode was brought to you by Wide Circle, helping you make better talent decisions. To learn more, visit widecircle.eu. That's WIDECIRCLE.eu. Until next time.